even with some of our recruiters and people I worked with before, I sometimes get involved. They'll post a question and then I'll post a question back or a comment, and we start to get into these little kind of discussions. So I'll even take it offline, and it's I find it to be energizing in this world. So yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Hey everybody, it's Jason here. We had a little bit of editing glitches here at the beginning of this episode, so just welcome to the show. I'm Jason McClaren.
And I am Robert Lomonaco.
Hey Robert, thanks for coming on the show today. Robert is a Air Force veteran. That's how we met online through his staff members, and so he's a retired Air Force captain, I believe.
Yes.
And we'll start with his background. So Robert, tell us how what led you to join the military and what got you started there.
It's so interesting. I don't think my grandfather was huge in World War II, and I used to always kind of read up on his exploits in Africa and Italy and so on and so forth. And then I even, as a young kid, I remember my dad with Vietnam. He was in the New York National Guard. So I just always had like I wouldn't call it an affinity, but kind of leaning towards it. And as I started going into the college search, I realized, oh, there's this ROTC thing. And in some cases, you can get a scholarship. And it just complemented kind of what you were doing at school. And then lo and behold, after doing it for a while, I was like, I kind of really like this. And strangely enough, and it sounds weird, but like in 91, the economy was really had taken a downturn. And I recall at that point, I was already set to be an officer in the military, and all my friends, especially my fraternity, would have hundreds of letters, rejection letters on their doors. And I was like, hey, I don't even have to do this. And because I was already about to get commissioned, or I was set to be commissioned in 18 months. And so it started off as kind of like almost a surprise. And then it turned into something I really enjoyed and relate to. And I graduated, was commissioned, and then went on my first assignment to Tacoma, Washington from there. So that's kind of how I got in.
What did you do in the Air Force?
Good point. So it started a couple different roles. Ultimately, it ends up what we call logistics readiness officer. And logistics is kind of a very thrown out term, and there's a lot of quotes from leaders throughout history. Like, what is logistics? I don't know, but I need a lot of it. But it's a supply, transportation, warehousing, delivery, last mile. Think of, the Amazon concept and being able to order something and get it. A lot of that is logistics, and it's figuring out all those obstacles and things within the way. So throughout my career, it had been, supply officer handling hazardous materials. I went into warehousing, transportation, and then you get into much larger span of control roles where I was in Germany, and as like an operations officer, had almost 600 people indirectly and through some direct reports under me that handled everything in the Kaiserslautern area of Germany. And then ended up at, I would call, the highest level, which was the Defense Logistics Agency, which is literally the entity that is contracting for all the parts and the things for all the various aircraft or vehicles within the, I guess I could say, the military industrial complex. So that's where I ultimately ended up after my first role in Washington. So kind of went all over the world, to be honest with you.
Right. Yeah, I think the logistics guys, you don't think of things like that in the military. I always talk about, the militaries are like little cities, so they have all the same things that regular cities have. And
Yes.
I was a firefighter in the Air Force, and when I tell people that, they say, "Oh, I thought Air Force just did planes or whatever."
Right.
You have firefighters, police officers, cooks, fitness people, logistics like yourself. So lots of options out there for those interested in the military. Um, Anything you want to do with your life, you can do pretty much in the military.
Yeah, a lot of it to score. It's funny you mentioned firefighting. I actually remember from the civil engineering side, having to get stuff, and these orders would come in, and it wasn't, at the base level you would order something, and it wasn't until I was at the Defense Logistics Agency and working with the teams in Philadelphia. Oh, that's how they contract to get your suits, your hats, all that stuff, or hats, your helmets. And so I got to see it full fledged from a practice event at McCord where they took an old building and burnt it down. And the first time these guys are feeling what heat is. And then I ended my career at visiting Philadelphia and seeing the team that was ordering that equipment that you would have worn, well, 20 years ago or 20 years prior to that. So it was kind of a full circle. I had no idea that you were a firefighter. So it's really wild.
Yeah, that's kind of what led me to do what I'm doing now. So,
Really?
what'd you do when you got
Right.
out of the military?
So I think I had about one day of, hey, I'm retired. What was interesting, you might have seen it too. So back in 2012 is when I got out, and we had what I would describe a pretty good transition program, or at least for me, it felt like it was a really good program. So I almost was chomping at the bit to want to work for like a DHL or some kind of transportation company and get into that world. What ended up happening is, I took a couple little jobs here and there, but what piqued my interest is that company Zipcar, wheels when you want them. And it used to remind me of, supply, right part, right place, right time. And I think that's kind of been in many companies kind of have iterations of that. And it turned into, Zipcar was all about providing assets to people that don't have cars, especially New York City was kind of where it was big. And the logistics, if you would, of, you know, what are people doing in this area, understanding what they might need for vehicles, and then how to take care of those vehicles, and again provide something to people that they don't normally have and need access to. So I did that for a while, and then of course, as you continue to get up in age, as much as Zipcar is such an amazing company, we called it hands on hood, and it was very transactional. you know 1 minute you're in the middle of a meeting, and another minute there's a car that wasn't where it was supposed to be, and someone has an issue. And one thing that was also interesting about Zipcar is it was part of Avis budget. So one of the other aspects of that role, which I can get into more, was you had Zipcar that was about replacing assets and people who drive a car very infrequently, owned by Avis Budget Group, whose the majority of their business model is people on business trips. So they drive normally, have to go to a different city, and they hop in another car so they know what they're doing. And part of my world was, why do these people constantly get flat tires because they hit the curbs? And you had to understand that, wow, I have a completely different uh, customer base, and then relay that back to leadership. And very similar at times what you did in the military. If I was in Afghanistan, you can't take an American idea. You grew up with a toaster or a microwave, and try to, you have to really think about, when you're working with someone who doesn't have a microwave, who never grew up with that stuff, and why cooking can take 2, 3, 4 hours. We're going to lunch, but it's like 10 o'clock. Well, yeah, we're not going to eat for 2 hours. Why? Well, it takes a long time for rice to boil. I mean, so a lot of that got, if you would, I glommed onto roles, or got excited when I got into roles, because I could instantly see a relation to what I had done in the military. And then now I'm with Verizon, and we could talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with doing things outside of the military related to what you're doing, even if it's not the exact same thing.
Hmm.
Like I said, I was a firefighter. Now I do safety,
Oh,
but that's what got me into it. So I was a fire inspector, which is going out and inspecting buildings for fire safety. That led me into construction, which then led me into
mhm.
general safety, and now that's what I do in my civilian career. In addition to the Go Hero stuff, but um, yeah, definitely you can pivot and then move into new career fields or new industries, depending on what you've done in the past. So yeah, so that led you into Verizon, you said?
Yeah. So, as I said, Zipcar became extremely transactional. I was like, okay, I need something a little bit more strategic, in the sense of, you know, I'd like to have something that you can plan. I like the 5 meter target was killing me. I wanted to look down range a little more. And Verizon's really strong military background. I also had a cousin of mine that had been with Verizon at that point. It was 30 years. I remember when he started, and it was like 9X back then. And also had another cousin who was in the company. So it was really nice to, hey, I've seen these positions. What about the company? And the first things out of their mouth were, it's amazing, right? Plus, Verizon, probably seen, has been top 5 military hiring companies consistently over many years. So, literally, it was a job that was advertised as basically logistics. But when I asked, it was more about the carrying and feeding, as I like to call, about vehicles, which, again, from the Defense Logistics Agency, or even back down in my more tactical level, at a base level in the Air Force was very similar, which was you had to buy assets, you had to have things in place to fix, make sure that the parts were there, the tools for the individuals to fix the vehicles and so on, and then all the way to end of life, where you had to figure out, okay, how are we going to do an auction? And everything now is more about ROI and total cost of ownership. That was much more, very I would say more strategic, and to sit down and to really pitch, hey, we probably want to look at a little bit more money buying this year because you've got 15-year-old assets that are breaking all the time. And I just immediately dove into that because I felt like that was all aspects of 20 years of my career were in the day-to-day of this job, and to include even the safety stuff you mentioned. I did a lot of that in Germany, and you can imagine the Germans, you have to have a chair, certain things with a door jam, and I was like, it was so amazing. But then I began to see that as I walked into a garage work center, and I'd be like, that can't be safe. And I would ask those questions, and they would go, yeah, we would do anything we can to get rid of these lifts without the cables. And I'm like, okay, let's put together an RFP, and you ask the questions of what you want, and then lo and behold, change started to happen, which is, again, a lot of what you do in the military. When you ask questions and you find out what's going on, how do you move the friction points and you move forward? So yeah.
Yeah, speaking of change, coming from logistics and that side, do you do a lot of lean processing, that sort
Yeah.
of thing?
Well, it's interesting you bring that. Avis Budget Group was huge on that. I think you might remember back in the day, sometimes they used to talk about this story about they put monitors or cameras out and they would watch the mechanics working on the B1 walking around. And there's a story, or at least it's what they like to tell us. You see one line where they kept on doing the same thing over and over again. What was going on? They find out, oh, they needed a tool. And someone's like, well, why the heck is the toolbox on the other side of the hangar? So they realized, just bring the toolbox closer. Verizon doesn't do that as much, or at least I'm not involved in that aspect with the fleet. But Avis Budget, every year we would break out. Here's where the vehicles are coming in. Volkswagen was brought into the fleet a little bit different than a Chevy, different setups and so on. And you would constantly go through that cycle of what's the process going to be, how can we improvement, when there's an issue or a delay, where are we going to move the vehicles? And it happened. I loved it. It was torture because you got back and your email box was full. But Avis Budget was extremely good at attacking those things because it always about cars in, cars out, moving cars, and then the kittens, the people, scattering the vehicles all over the place. And now you have all these vehicles in Florida, or the vehicles moved from Florida to New York because of a hurricane, and now you have to figure out how to get them back. And we would constantly have lean type meetings, Six Sigma, basic Kaizen type stuff to get to the bottom of it. It was part of the culture, and I loved it.
Yeah, and I think that helps us drive change in organizations, and just looking at different challenges like that. Just getting cars from one place to another. So it's definitely a testament to leadership on your end. Um,
Well,
so
and especially seeing that it happens, and you go, "Oh, okay, I'm not coming in as like a Martian." You go, "I've
yeah,
done this before." Every time we would have to deploy, we always would run through the military planning process, if you would, at the deployment line, and how we staging equipment. And I was like, "Oh, it's very similar. It's just whiteboard instead of something from 30 years ago that you're writing on." But yeah,
and I saw the Air Force's thing about changing their deployment. When I was in, it was six
God,
months
yeah.
deployed. Yeah, 6 months
Hmm.
deployed, 12 months home, and they're doing that for logistical reasons. It's hard to deploy a lot of people just for 6 months. So sounds like they're trying to one either do longer or deploy more people from the same place.
Yeah,
Because
we saw that with the Army a lot. I think that was one of the things that was, every military has their own way of doing business. I think the hardest part for the Air Force, and again, this could be its own subject, is you have a city, the base, and if you send everyone out, the base still kind of exists. We still have bills to pay and things going on. The Army was a lot more plug and play. This transportation, brigade would attach to this unit and so on and so forth. And okay, so the transportation brigade's not here. It's okay. We still have the civil engineers on the base to fix base housing or whatever it was. But yeah, we've definitely had to look at a new way of doing business, because the other thing that's unique with the Air Force is, those planes that go, it's the same maintenance team that work those planes. You have this huge tail. And yeah, we used to talk about that a lot. The logistics tail that goes with an Air Force deployment it can be pretty intense. So yeah.
Definitely. Robert, if you were running into a new team member or a new person in leadership, and you had 1 minute to give them a leadership tip, what would it be?
Oh wow. The biggest thing, and it's funny, it's happening right now. I I You have to meet with the people. I say, you know, I'll, especially a new leader, I'll couch it as, hey, or how long before you come around and start gripping and grinning and shaking people's hands, or I'm looking forward to seeing you come in and have a meeting with us. And I just did this with one of our new VPs. And it was like, hey, I'm looking forward to you coming and see us. And you kind of saw that look. Do I have that on my calendar yet? You know, Obviously they were going to come, but that's probably the number one thing, is because whether or not there's validity to what an individual will have to say, it's a whole nother discussion. The ability to show that compassion as a leader, say, I'm here to see you. I want to know your name. What is something that I can help you with, is goes so far as, I would say that leader before you get to that SVP level, because again, once you're at that level, you usually have hundreds of people under you, and it's a little bit more complex. But VP, new senior director, new director coming in, get out, grip and grin, and don't. I'm always hinting you can't legislate from behind your desk.
Yeah, I've been places where my leaders would say, well, you're the director, you're the whatever, you should be in the meetings in the office all day. And I said, that's not how I lead. So
Right.
I got to be out there, like you said, shaking hands and kissing babies. And
Well, a lot of times, we live in this world that a lot of times, we still kind of have some of that metrics and data, and you have to look at a slide on the board. And then I've seen things where, you know, we had a new SVP come into fleet, and he was walking around, and he said, Rob, give me one or two things we need to work on. And I said, we need to figure out how to do the auctioning better in the company. Like, we're making $12 million making on selling, but that money goes into, like, I call it the gift card fund. We never see it again. I said, so what is our incentive to sell vehicles at the best price? And then we're so short on capital on the other end. Why can't we parlay that into capital? Or could we do some things where I could lower the cost of new vehicles? And to have that conversation, if you think about it, you want to put it on the slide. Well, make sure there's a slide. I need a background paper, yeah. You just mention that to someone, like in the hallways of conversation, and they're like, wow, that is kind of dumb. Let me see what I can do. And so that, to your point, I think there's so many examples, and you see that in the military. It's always the story of someone watched a private doing something, or the airmen, and they're like, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. And you get something done.
yeah, it kind of goes back to the old lean Kaizen
Yeah.
process, just cutting out extra steps or redundant work. It's something somebody made a while back. Just look busy.
I know what you're talking about there. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Robert. If the listeners want to get a hold of you, how could they get in touch with you?
Oh, best is I think on LinkedIn. You got my name up there. It might be my dad, because we kind of share the same name, but he's 85 and not really following on LinkedIn. But yeah, LinkedIn's the best way for folks to reach out and ask questions. I get it a lot. And I'm also, even with some of the recruiters and people I work with before, I sometimes get involved. They'll post a question, and then I'll post a question back or a comment, and we start to get into these little kind of discussions, and I'll even take it offline. And I find it to be energizing in this world. So yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Definitely. We'll put the link in the show notes so people can get directly to you. All
Absolutely.
right. Well, Robert, thanks for coming on the show today.
Sure thing. I really enjoyed it, and hit me up anytime, Jason. I do appreciate it.